Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for a conversation from Five Lakes Energy and team about a recent report that was released exploring how Ann Arbor could achieve its goal of powering the entire community with 100% renewable electricity by the year 2030. Tonight's presentation is going to be a combination of remarks from the consultant team, and then there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. Just directionally, want to point out we do not have a chat function, but there is a Q&A box that you should see on the bottom of Zoom. At any point during the discussion, if you have a question, feel free to write it into that box. I'll be monitoring it throughout the session, and at strategic points, we'll indicate to our speakers if there's a clarification on something they just said. We'll stop and get that clarified. Otherwise, at the end, we hope to leave ample time for broad discussion. So with that said, I'm delighted to be here tonight. My name is Missy Stoltz. I'm the director of Ann Arbor's Office of Sustainability and Innovations. And here in Ann Arbor, as I'm sure most of you know on the line, we have the goal, sometimes described as audacious, aggressive, and scientifically necessary, of achieving community-wide carbon neutrality by the year 2030. So this particular analysis that we put forward was explicitly looking at how we could achieve that goal. So bear with me for a second. I'm going to pull up our slides here. Now, if you joined us last week, there was also a city council work session where the city council members heard the results firsthand from the consultants. This presentation is going to mirror that presentation. So if you were able to attend that, you're going to hear redundant content. We think that's actually useful. This is a very complicated topic. So I appreciate our consultants coming back and delivering it again. If you have to leave early and you didn't quite capture it, I just want to point out two things. One, we will also be doing this exact same presentation to the Energy Commission at their special meeting, well, their normal meeting, which is next Tuesday. We're also recording this session so that folks can come back and view it later. So let me just really quickly walk through what we're going to do tonight. You're going to hear a little bit from me on the front end, and then I'm going to step back. So I'm going to walk you through the scope of the analysis. And we did do a public survey. A third-party firm did that, but they are not with us tonight. So I'm going to attempt to summarize what their findings were. Then I'm going to turn it over to Douglas Jester, the managing director for Five Lakes Energy, and he's going to walk through the technical energy options analysis report. They're going to share their preliminary thoughts, and then we're going to have an open discussion about the report as it has come out. And I just want to clarify, tonight's discussion is open for any comments, questions, thoughts that you may have. Staff, however, have not had a chance to come together to analyze. We're still going to be doing debriefing on the technical models that are behind this report. And so what you're going to hear tonight are the findings from our consultants. These are not staff's recommendations. It's going to be quite a bit of time before staff are prepared to really dive into the data and come back with recommendations based on that analysis. So I just wanted to be transparent. I'm excited that our consultants are here tonight, but please understand that these recommendations and findings are theirs, and we're very thankful for them. We have some analysis to do on the staff side before we're ready to say what formal recommendations from the city to the city are. So with that, in terms of the scope of analysis, there were actually two different scopes, and I realized I didn't tee up the first one. The first one is what I'll talk about in a moment, and that's what American Pulse did. And that was to really understand and do a public survey about what people are looking for in their energy system. And so we wanted to do a representative sample of Ann Arborites, and we wanted to know what they most value in that system, what they would prioritize. Second, we also wanted to hire a team to help us analyze, as I mentioned previously, how we could achieve our goal of 100% renewable electricity powering the community. So we called this an energy options analysis, and we wanted to really explore the various pathways the city could explore to achieve these goals. What kind of procurement options were available to us, and how could they be stacked? We also wanted to do a study of a traditional electric utility municipalization process, also colloquially known as a phase one study, to really understand kind of in broad strokes what it might cost and what the process might look like if we were to move forward with condemning or taking over DTE's assets and becoming the sole utility provider as a community. And we wanted to do a phase 2 rate analysis for something called a sustainable energy utility, which is a supplemental utility that would come in centering the idea of generating as much renewable energy in the community as possible with renewable energy paired with energy storage systems. And this was an idea that was brought forward about 2 years ago as staff were exploring lots of different options. And we wanted to really test and push on the concept of an SAU to see if it really was feasible based on our preliminary analysis. We wanted to go much deeper and see if that was feasible. So this was the scope. As we did that and asked them to analyze, our consultants to analyze those variables, we wanted them to be thinking about how well all of the options being presented, whether that was a procurement option in the energy system or whether that was a utility structure, how well those different options aligned with our goal, which is community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. We also wanted to know how it aligned with the goal of powering the community with 100% renewable energy, since that is the goal the council has authorized. We wanted the strategies evaluated based on the principles of equity, sustainability, and transformation, which are the 3 principles in A20 that guide. And A20, for those who may not know, is the city's climate and equity plan, framework, goals, and all of the actions. So we wanted to know how well these different structures and procurement options aligned with those 3 principles. City Council also adopted a series of energy criteria and principles to guide all of our energy decision-making. This was also supported by the Energy Commission and staff. And so we needed to understand how well the different options aligned with those principles and criteria, given that Council mandated that we evaluate strategies based on that. And then, of course, we want to make sure that whatever we do supports a just transition for workers, especially workers in the fossil fuel industry. And so that was a variable that was evaluated or asked to be evaluated as well. So that's a little bit of the scope. I'm now going to pretend that I'm channeling American Pulse and tell you a little bit about the public survey that was done. So obviously I am not American Pulse, so I'm going to do a little bit more reading of their slides than normal. But if you would like to hear in their own words, we did have a recording of their presentation to City Council. So as I mentioned, the city hired a third-party firm to come in and do a poll of Ann Arborites to understand their sentiment around the city's energy future and what they most wanted centered in energy decision-making at the city. We did a competitive process, and American Pulse Research and Polling was selected as the firm to administer this poll. They conducted a poll from August 28th through September 5th of this year, so not very long ago at all. This is just a little bit about American Pulse. I will not be able to do the service that it needs. I'd recommend looking them up. They have a lot of experience with polling, very qualified folks on the team that are knowledgeable about different methodologies, including mixed method methodologies, in order to do really good kind of social research. So in terms of the methodology, as I mentioned, it was conducted a little over a month ago. The sample size was 412. The margin of error was 95% with a confidence interval of plus or minus 4.8%. It was a hybrid multimodal survey. And if you look at the mode counts, you can see what I mean by that. They put live answer, so think phone, right? They were on the phone talking to people. There was an online panel and there was a text to web. This was a random sample. It was a statistically representative sample of Ann Arborites. That was a requirement of the poll, that we didn't want to have a sort of self-selecting sample size. We really wanted to understand through a randomized sample what Ann Arborites were thinking about and really wanted centered in that energy system, as I mentioned before. We had prepped them that they would have to weight, if necessary, the sample to make sure that we had equal representation across age, gender, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, zip code, et cetera. What they shared with us in all of the raw data is on a public website, which I'll link to at the end. So you can see all of the responses, you can see their methodology, you can see it all. But there was very little weighting that had to happen because that 412 number actually represented the demographics of the community nicely. So there were a few findings when they went through the analysis, and we'll start with this one. So what they did is the questions were asked in multiple different ways, and this was really important to me as we were talking about the survey instrument itself. So there was always a chance for people to give verbatim answers to questions. There was open-ended, which meant that there was coding of all the open-ended responses, but then there were also different types of survey questions. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But here in the gray boxes, they pulled out specific quotes from individuals. So this specific quote indicates, what this constituent really wants is that we don't lose energy, and I don't want our property taxes to pay for it. This was a retired Caucasian female, 70 plus, a high school grad, and generally supportive of the city's 2030 goals. So overall, this survey really was designed, as I've mentioned a few times, to help us understand what people are looking for in the energy system, but it also sought to understand how familiar people were with our clean energy goals and the E20 goal of community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. And we really wanted to have different ways people would respond to the survey so that we had them prioritizing, we had them saying things in their own word, they could evaluate options against each other, and that was important for triangulation of different data and to make sure we didn't have kind of one-off responses. And one of the things that we learned is that Ann Arborites in general are supportive of the city's 2030 renewable energy goal. And overall, they're placing a very high priority on resilience, reliability, and cost. And we'll further explore that in a moment. So these are the strategic insights that American Pulse found. Once again, that American Pulse found. So while I happen to work for the city, I am not telling you anything from the city's perspective. This is what the research found, that the three most important variables that the public is looking for in this order are resilience, reliability, and cost. Now, we did not ask the word resilience in the survey or the word reliability. We used the definitions of those terms. That way we didn't have kind of biasing that was happening. So we were really sticking to the actual definition of what these terms mean. And across all the different questions, these were the top three priorities. Resilience ranks highest amongst all demographics. So it doesn't matter, and we'll explore that in another slide in a second. It is by far and away the most important variable people were looking for in terms of their top priorities in the energy system. So this is a little bit more granularity on the findings. As I mentioned, resilience ranks #1 across all demographics. Let me just clarify. Resilience is the ability to have power even when a disruption moves through, or an emergency kind of moves through the system. Reliability is not to lose power on sunny days. And of course, cost. It was having renewable energy at a cost equivalent to, or potentially even less than what we pay today for energy. So resilience ranked #1 across all demographic groups. 66% of respondents selected it as a top 3 priority. And we heard things here like being able to withstand a storm, right, was the top verbatim answer, meaning when people had the choice just to tell us whatever they wanted to tell us, this was the #1 response in voting. In terms of reliability came out #2 amongst residents, with 48.6% selecting it as one of their top 3 priorities. And the #1 verbatim response here in this category, which was the #2 verbatim response overall, was withstanding routine disturbances. But cost was a very close third, with 48% selecting it as one of their top 3 priorities. And you'll notice that's within the margin of error of 4.8% within the survey. And energy cost was the #3 verbatim answer that was given. The second insight that American Pulse found was that there's actually high awareness of the 100% renewable energy goal. 75% of respondents were aware of Ann Arbor's goal to transition to 100% renewable energy. Only 6% reported having absolutely no idea or knowledge of that initiative, and 30% had said they'd heard a lot about that initiative. So not only were people aware of it, a second question into the survey was how supportive they were of that particular goal. And the answer is generally residents are supportive of it. So just about 60% of residents responded favorably or highlighted the importance of achieving the 100% renewable energy goal by 2030 or earlier. So some respondents in the survey actually noted as soon as possible and no later than 2030 was a response that we received. And you can see in the box below, as soon as possible, 2030 feels aggressively achievable. And that response was from a Caucasian male, 30 to 39, with a bachelor's degree. And this particular individual's answer to question #3 was his #1 priority is transitioning to renewables. You can see a little bit more about those statistics, broadly speaking. So of the respondents, a pretty notable amount indicated that it was extremely important for us to keep going on this goal. The fourth strategic insight that American Pulse found was, broadly speaking, there's consensus on all criteria, but intensity favors 3. And what's important here is, I mentioned previously, questions were asked in different ways. So one of the questions was on a scale of 1 to 5, and there was different ranking, and you can see from not important to very important. How important is it to you that your energy system is this, or that your energy system is that? And every person could pick a 5 for every single element, or you could pick a 3 for everyone, or you could pick a 1 and a 5. But the idea was that people could pick everything. A follow-up question made people prioritize the top 3, and a follow-up question allowed people to pick their number 1. And so across those different answers, what we find is when you give people the choice to like everything, they like everything. When you force them to actually say what their top priorities are, that's when we really start to see notable distinction and solidification of those priorities: resilience, reliability, and cost. And here you can see in that open question that says, how important is it to you, where they could pick every single thing. What the survey firm highlighted here is where people indicated it was either very important to them at a high percentage, and these are the highest percentage or highest ranking in terms of percentage criteria that people identified. And again, resilience was very important to almost 64% of respondents. Reliability, not far behind, with roughly 60% of respondents indicating it was very important. And the third highest ranking was cost, with 47% indicating it was very important. But above those numbers are those who indicated it was both very important as well as somewhat important to have in the system. The fifth strategic insight was we would ignore costs and affordability at our own peril. And here, while cost sometimes was the third variable, we were really interested in understanding where it ranked, and if there was any variability in any of these scoring criteria amongst different groups, like low-income households or communities of color, those who are younger than others in the community. Is there any variation here? And so what you can see in the kind of tan box is some of the notable differences. So once again, resilience across all demographic groups was number 1. But cost and reliability do flip in terms of priority amongst groups. So those making less than $75,000 a year indicate that resilience still is number 1, but cost is not far behind, followed by reliability. Same is true for non-whites, and same is true for those under 40. So a finding from the consultants, especially when they looked at the verbatim responses, a lot of people talk about cost in different ways. So some people talk about wanting to make sure their own energy is affordable, but they also found a number of respondents who talked about wanting to make sure that their neighbor's energy was affordable, or that we didn't inadvertently increase costs for others. And so this was a finding the consultants found to be significant enough to warrant consideration. And once again, these are their own words. And I think it's worth spending a moment with that. So just to kind of close this out here, here's some verbatims that they received from respondents regarding those top 3 criteria. In terms of resilience, people want power to remain on after big events, pushing towards responsive with weather-related events when the power goes out. Anything related to resiliency would be my priority. Reliability, you've got things like stable power access. The outages are bad, so just having power. You've got costs. I think keeping costs low or the same as what we pay now. Everything, making sure people can afford energy. I hope that we can still have the same cost. So these are their bottom line findings, that focusing on resilience, reliability, and costs are key to success of hitting our 2030 goal. That while Ann Arbor residents are generally supportive of the city's renewable energy goals, they're going to place a high priority on resilience, reliability, and cost. And once again, this is a representative sample of Ann Arborites. And they recommend that we tailor communications and our techniques to the different individuals that we're engaging with. So their response in the end, I feel like I'm just repeating it, but they recommend we focus on resilience, reliability, and cost as we move forward. And that is the end of their presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Douglas. I'll take one quick second just to see if there is a question about the survey. Resilience in this study, as I indicated previously, there is this question that means making sure that you have power during times of disruption or disasters. Great. All right, well, with that, we will move on. So Douglas, over to you.
Thank you very much. As Missy indicated, I'm Douglas Jester. I'm managing partner of Five Lakes Energy, and we led the team that developed the technical report on energy options available to the city of Ann Arbor to meet a goal of 100% renewable energy by 2030. I'm joined online tonight by Rick Bunch, also of Five Lakes Energy, Joe Kopp of SunStore, who did much of the work on the opportunities for solar within the community, and Scott Burnham from Nugen, who led the work on municipalization. Not with us tonight, but important on the team is Potomac Law Group. They're one of the leading energy practices in Michigan, but also very importantly for this work, one of the leading firms that practices law before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So with that introduction of the team, I'm going to push on. The report is on the order of 120 pages. There's a lot behind that in various models, financial models that we are providing to the city. I'm going to give a fairly detailed summary, but it will nonetheless be a summary tonight with the slides and my comments. The starting point here is we're trying to get to 100% renewable sources of energy for the community's electric loads in 2030. And that's a continuing policy, so we need to look beyond. So one of the first things that we did was to develop a profile of Ann Arbor electricity usage and project that forward into out to 2044, so a 20-year projection. There's a little bit of population growth, certainly in Ann Arbor, and we did not specifically account for that because it's a little bit difficult to project and depends on a lot of future zoning decisions and things like that. That's not an important error to worry about in these projections as we've applied them. The main dynamics here are that we took account of the A-to-0 plans to both increase the efficiency of the community's use of electricity and to electrify a lot of current uses of fossil fuels for both transportation and buildings. And those push electricity demand in opposite directions. So efficiency would reduce it, electrification would increase it. Those are roughly in balance out to 2030 or a year or two after that. But then electrification really starts to take hold and it drives an increase in electricity usage on the order of 80%. Currently, Ann Arbor uses just short of 1 million megawatt hours or 1 billion kilowatt hours per year, and that will scale up to about 1.8. The kilowatt hours, what you're typically billed on in your electric bill, costs 17, 18 cents for residential customers, a bit less for commercial customers. That gives you a context for this. And on the graph, we're showing residential and commercial uses. In the case of vehicle electrification, we did some modeling of when that charging would occur, took account of commuters, both coming into Ann Arbor and Ann Arborites leaving to work elsewhere, and charging behavior related to that. But most of that charging is done at home. And so that's a significant part of the growth in residential charging that you see. Not shown as a graph, but there's a change in the seasonal pattern of use. Currently, Ann Arbor electricity usage peaks in the summer due to air conditioning. With the electrification of buildings, that peak moves to winter. So we're hot July afternoons or August afternoons are peak now. Future peaks would be January in the dark in a cold snap. And that's important to understand because it bears on the role of solar in meeting Ann Arbor's needs as we go forward. Next slide. Yep. So on this slide, we're showing the sources of electricity for Ann Arbor in 2023, and then a projection to 2030 with a continuation of current plans of by DTE and by the city. These are projections of that depend on both DTE and Ann Arbor vigorously carrying out those plans, so that it's not rest on your laurels approach, but it does not include major new programs or approaches. It's continuing to do well and with energy the things that are already being done. Today, DTE is producing about 15% of its electricity supply for its customers from renewable energy sources. They recently had an integrated resource plan considered by the Public Service Commission. There was a settlement in that case. Ann Arbor was an intervener. So were other parties for whom I served as an expert witness. So we're very familiar with this material. The integrated resource plan outlines a series of investments over time in renewables, but in 2030, we expect that DTE will be producing about 35% of their general service power supply through use of renewables, a combination of wind and solar with small amounts of legacy biomass and hydropower. In addition, DTE offers what are referred to as voluntary green pricing programs. In DTE's case, it's called the MI Green Power Program, or MIGP. And there are significant subscriptions to that program in Ann Arbor. Today, that's about 2%. Currently, it's economically beneficial to participate in that program. It's actually cheaper to be a program participant at 100% renewables than getting their generic power, which is predominantly fossil. That reflects that currently renewables are the cheapest source of power. And it's one of the reasons that a fairly rapid growth of renewables shows up in the integrated resource plan and gets us to about 35% by 2030. Because of the favorable economics, that drives fairly rapid voluntary uptake of the voluntary green pricing program. And so we're projecting that could be about 10%. Ann Arbor owns a couple of dams on the Huron River, sells that power under a contract to DTE, but retains the renewable energy credits. So the right to claim that you're providing renewable energy to the world belongs to Ann Arbor in that case. And that's about 2% of the power supply. Ann Arbor Public Schools has made a commitment to use renewable energy. And I should say on the side, we are excluding University of Michigan from this because they have their own commitment and deal more or less directly with DTE for that. So they're not falling within this planning scope. In addition, solar is now pretty attractive economically, behind the meter solar, which we abbreviate as BTM in many of these slides. And so we're seeing significant uptake of that. We will get to it later, but that can be accelerated through solarization program, which Ann Arbor currently has, and we're assuming in this graph, as well as through the sustainable energy utility, if that is adopted. So we'll talk more about that later. The net of all of this is that we're forecasting that by 2030, the renewable portion of Ann Arbor community's power supply will be about 59%, and the non-renewable portion will be 41%. A portion of that is nuclear, the Fermi plant that DTE operates, but the majority of it is fossil, both now and in that 2030 projection. So we take as the need that we must address how Ann Arbor fills in that 41%. There are uncertainties in these forecasts, and we have thought about how to adapt if the numbers turn out, as inevitably they will, to be different than our projections. But that is not an especially challenging thing, and it means that the errors in our projections are not really consequential to the strategies or costs of the effort to get to 100% renewables by 2030. Let's go to the next slide.
Douglas, before you do, we have a
Yeah.
question that I think would be great. Can you just explain what behind the meter solar is for attendees?
Sure. So it's in the utility business, when generation occurs on the customer side of the meter, that's referred to as behind the meter. When it occurs on the utility side, it's referred to as front of the meter. So when we talk about behind the meter solar, we're basically talking about your typical rooftop solar that belongs to the utility customer. Can be ground mounted, but it's on the customer side of the meter. And we'll talk about that a little more later, but the economics are that what you produce and consume on site, you completely avoid utility costs for what's behind the meter, where if you have the solar elsewhere, even if you're somehow paying for that solar and having it delivered to you, you pay the utility the delivery fee. So that's important to the economics of these choices. Anything else? Okay, well, let's push on. So we've looked at a lot of energy options. I want to draw a distinction here between energy options, which are sources of energy or the renewable credits for that energy, from utility options, which are, are you being served by DTE, by municipal utility, or a combination of DTE and a sustainable energy utility? Right in this portion, I want to talk about the energy options. We looked at quite a number of those options and ruled out a number of them as either unacceptable or impractical for various reasons, and wound up focusing on those listed on the slide here. And I want to give some definition to each of those. So we certainly considered behind the meter solar or solar plus storage. As I was just describing, that's solar that's on site at a building that where power is consumed and supplies power very locally. There are limited other technologies for behind the meter generation, but nothing that could be used in a widespread way other than solar. So we really focused on solar and then solar with the battery combined. Community solar it's a contested definition. Let me say that first, but the sort of pure definition is the idea is that there is a solar array somewhere, probably in your community, and various members of the community subscribe to the power supplied by that solar array. So they own a share of the output. And then that is actually delivered to the utility. It just by virtue of wiring and law that's necessary. But you typically would get a bill credit for the value of that solar, of your share of that solar facility or the output from it. And that bill credit offsets part of what you would otherwise pay the utility. The utility's view of that is, they're taking the power and delivering it to you, so they at least deserve the delivery charge on it. And then they typically take a point of view about the value of that solar compared to the value of the rest of their power. In Michigan, we do not have a legal construct that allows community solar to happen unless it's purely voluntary on the part of the utility. And Michigan's regulated utilities all currently take the view that that would be retail competition to them, and they don't agree. So community solar in that pure sense is not available. The utilities generally offer through their voluntary green pricing program something that they label as community solar, but that means that they own the solar facilities and they allow you to claim an amount of solar from those facilities in return for paying for your share of the costs of that solar facility. And then they give you a credit for that for the avoided costs of non-solar power that you don't get by virtue of getting the solar from the community solar. Excuse me a moment. So that is in the broader community not generally agreed as community solar, but it's represented as such by DTE. You don't have an option at present, but there is legislation under consideration that would enable community solar. And then, of course, if you had a municipal utility, you could do community solar. An advanced version of the sustainable energy utility would allow a version of community solar with a second set of wires. So we evaluated community solar as an option, but just want to be clear that as we speak today, it is not an option that is available to Ann Arbor until something more happens. Pushing on, we evaluated, I'm still on the previous slide, Missy. Yeah. We evaluated power purchase agreements, two kinds, traditional and virtual. So a power purchase agreement is a contract for the power from a specific facility. So it'd typically be a wind farm or a solar array. And in the traditional power purchase agreement, the purchaser in that arrangement is taking ownership of the power as it leaves the facility. If that power source is remote from you, it has to go onto the transmission grid in order to get anywhere to serve what we call load, to meet the needs of some customer for power. And the general legal construct, not just in Michigan, but across the country, is that that power is required to be sold into a wholesale market. And then all of the utilities that serve load, like DTE, are required to purchase all of the power they sell from that same wholesale market. So if you take ownership of the power as it leaves the facility, you have to sort of immediately turn it over to the transmission company and into the wholesale market. And then you're basically taking a risk on the difference between what it costs you to buy the power from that renewable energy facility under your power purchase agreement and what it's worth in the wholesale market. That is pretty risky and something that would not typically be taken on by a city. It does sometimes make sense for a utility that in fact can pass that cost on to their customers. But absent that ability to pass on costs to customers, it'd be a quite large risk and not one that we would recommend. But that's the traditional power purchase agreement. A virtual power purchase agreement is more of a financial arrangement, and it could look very much like a traditional one. We call that a contract for differences. So Ann Arbor could sign a contract for with someone who has a solar array or a wind farm and say, we'll pay you so much per megawatt hour produced, and take the market price as an offset and lose money if the wholesale price is less than the power purchase price, gain money if it's greater than the power purchase price. But that's tantamount to the traditional power purchase agreement, except that Ann Arbor wouldn't, in that case, have a utility and be able to actually use the power. There are other ways of pricing a virtual power purchase agreement, and the most typical would be that the purchaser just pays a fixed amount to claim the renewable aspects of that power, and the seller has to sell the power into the wholesale market and take the risk on the wholesale price of power. In such a deal, the seller is selling the renewable energy credits based on what they need to meet expected revenue and what their expectation is in the wholesale market. So that's the way that renewable energy credits are priced in those settings. So I know that's a long and complicated thing, but it's really sort of central to how all of this works. There are brokers who purchase renewable energy credits from specific facilities in much the way I described, and then sell them to others. This is the way that large corporations who make a sustainability commitment and say that they're going to use renewable energy typically operate. Some contract with power or specific facilities for their renewable energy credits, but many of them take generic renewable energy credits. And there's a national market as well as some regional markets in which you can purchase renewable energy credits. The distinction here is that you really don't know where they're from. If you do a power purchase agreement where it's priced based on renewable energy credits, it's for credits from a specific facility or list of facilities. The national market is generic and you don't know where it's from. That means that, and we'll talk about this more, but Ann Arbor can impose its values or principles on a power purchase agreement priced as renewable energy credits. You really can't to any great degree for national renewable energy credits. There are some nuances there, but that's the core difference between these two options. A virtual power reduction agreement is where one side, let's say Ann Arbor, provides financial assistance to the other to do energy efficiency or rooftop solar or something along those lines that reduces the other party's consumption of power, and particularly of fossil fuel power, and then Ann Arbor takes credit for it. So it's very much like a renewable energy credit purchase. It's just with a third party who's doing either energy efficiency or behind the meter generation. And then finally, there is the option of participating in DTE's My Green Power program at community scale, rather than through each member of the community voluntarily participating. There's not current arrangement under the tariff, the DTE tariff for that. But if Ann Arbor issued a request for proposals, for renewable energy credits, it's possible that DTE could respond with an offer that would meet the terms of that RFP through Ann Arbor, the city, participating in the My Green Power program. So those are the kinds of options we evaluated and that we look at later on. So that was a lot of material on one slide. The rest will go faster, I promise. Most of them will anyway, but it's fundamental to understand really the rest of the report. We evaluated the energy options, each of those against the 8 to 0 criteria and principles. And I'm not going to walk through each cell of this matrix, but just generally, to the extent you're really getting renewable energy under any of these arrangements, you do get a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions globally, or in the geography that the renewable energy comes from. As long as they are new, you get additionality. And so we assumed both of those things would happen, and all of the options meet those two criteria. Equity and justice metrics are a little bit tricky. Cost to low-income households is certainly one of the relevant criteria. There are others related to access and so on, but those are tied up in the economics often. So our ratings here, while not exclusively about cost, are dominated by how the cost for low-income households is affected by the choice. So that's the basis for the equity and justice criterion. The other principles are not optional, but they're a little bit more nuanced. We evaluated all of the options on the other principles, and I think the general story is things done at utility scale can be done fairly fast. There is a construction time lag on top of a procurement time lag if you, say, go out to do a virtual PPA. The national rec market is a spot market. It's very liquid most of the time, and so that could be done, pretty quickly. Behind the meter in community solar, the construction timelines are not particularly long, but the number of people who have to make decisions in order to amass large quantities is large, and getting people to do that could be slow. And so we wound up giving a relatively poor speed rating on it as a programmatic approach to meeting 100% renewables, while recognizing that at individual level, speed can be very quick. So local considerations, locality, resilience of Ann Arborites when the grid power goes down, things like that are those are strong for behind the meter and community solar, and for voluntary power reduction programs, but they are weak for the utility programs. So there's kind of a rough trade-off between speed and the quality of the renewable source that you get. Next slide. Timelines are important here, and this slide anticipates a point I'll make a little more detail later, which is the timeline to get to a municipal utility is likely to be significantly longer than 2030 to get to a municipal utility and supply it with renewable power. So in general, we are recommending that Ann Arbor needs to pursue getting to 100% renewables by 2030 by other means, whether or not you're going forward with a municipalization effort. And if, for example, you have a contract for a virtual power purchase agreement, those could be written in such a way that when an MEU comes into effect, the contract could be conveyed from the city to the municipal utility. So there are, ways you could get ready, but we don't think that there's any practical way to think that you would first form a municipal utility and then pursue renewables for it and get that done by 2030. When you look at the various mechanisms, community solar is indicated is not yet available because the legal construct isn't there. And there are similarly difficulties in the virtual power reduction agreements in converting efficiency in some other community or rooftop solar in some other community into a credit that Ann Arbor can appropriately claim. There are some of the programs or some of the options that would no longer make sense if you had a municipal utility, like participation in the DTE voluntary green pricing program. So the timeline here is intended to show the relationship between key events and what options are available at any given time. Next slide. There are a lot of ways to look at the costs of these options. There's sort of cost to society at large. There's cost to the city. There's cost to DTE or to the MEU. This slide is focused on the cost to whomever is making the decision, since that affects the decision to go forward. So here we're assuming that purchasing national RECs, virtual power purchase agreement, would be done by the city. Behind the meters, done by whoever owns or the property where that solar system or solar plus storage system would be installed. And that's true whether it's through independent action, the city's solarization program, the sustainable energy utility, or an offering from the municipal utility. So to the right is better, is more expensive. To the left is less expensive to the buyer. And the green is 2030, while the orange is 2023, just to give you an idea of the trends. So what we're saying here is the trend is that behind the meter solar is going to become increasingly attractive. Participating in My Green Power or using national RECs or virtual PPAs are relatively modest. Community solar, reachable. Behind the meter storage together with solar is relatively expensive. Even in our forecast, though, it gets better. So we do in the report look at those other cost accounting stances, and some of those we'll present a little later. All of those different views of costs have to be thought about because whoever is paying, needs to understand it. Next slide. We built a number of scenarios where we combine these various energy options in order to meet the 100% renewable goal by 2030. What is feasible and likely to happen, and then of course what is optimal depends on which of the utility structures you're in. This graph I'm showing you assumes DTE continues to be the primary service provider, but there is a supplemental sustainable energy utility to accelerate adoption of behind the meter resources. And that Ann Arbor then is taking the other steps necessary to get to 100% renewables, which we label as DTE plus. We have in the report similar graphs for other scenarios. The general picture here is to get to 100% renewables by 2030, there is not any, there's not enough opportunity for solar within the city on rooftops or otherwise to meet 100% renewables. It is necessary that there be grid-based renewables. DTE in this scenario would supply some of that, and then Ann Arbor would need to complete it with what we have labeled as RECs. And that's Ann Arbor enabling grid scale renewables. We're not meaning by that label that it's national RECs or virtual power purchase agreement or other options, just that it's the city of Ann Arbor acquiring renewable energy credits for utility scale power. So we looked at these and evaluated phase-in requirements and costs under the various scenarios, and those are all in the report. If we can go to the next slide, we'll begin to explore those a little bit. This slide shows the difference between the portfolios of energy options that you might hope to achieve or can achieve under the various options. So if you have just DTE plus the city taking action to acquire RECs, you can see that the quantity of RECs required is about 42% of the community's electricity consumption. If you have a sustainable energy utility and can accelerate solar adoption within the community, that can be brought down to 34% by having an additional 8% of solar adoption. If you could add community solar to that, we think you could get about 6% community solar and drive the city's acquisition of renewable energy credits down to 27%. And then municipal energy utility, as I've said earlier, you really can't get there by 2030. But of course, then you have a similar sort of approach. It's just that the municipal utility would be contracting for power rather than renewable energy credits and would need to cover DTE's share in that power supply. Next slide. So the city having to do different things in these different scenarios leads to different kinds of city costs. The top block here is the cost in 2030 as we project them. The lower block is costs incurred getting ready for 2030. You can't turn all of this on in 2030, so you have to build up to it. And there are costs in the meantime. Total city outlays are the first line in each block. And then we distinguish between what we call recoverable costs and non-recoverable costs. Essentially, recoverable costs are being paid for by customers. So in the SEU scenario, those households and businesses who sign up for the sustainable energy utility get solar on their roofs or on their grounds, owned by the sustainable energy utility. And then they pay for that power. That payment is the recovery of costs. And so that is what we're labeling here. So it's paid by people in the community for power. And then non-recoverable costs are the things that the city pays out, say from the millage or out of the city budget, in order to get to the 100% renewable portfolio. Purchase of renewable energy credits or a virtual power purchase agreement to get renewable energy credits would be an example of those costs. So that's the kind of information that is supplied. And then, again, there's more detail in the report about where these numbers come from. And we will be handing over to the city the financial models underneath these numbers so that these options can be further explored, or as parameters such as prices of things change, these can be revised. Next slide. We also looked at the utility structure options, and basically there are these three. You can just continue to take service from DTE and take steps to achieve 100% renewable electricity credits for the community. Ann Arbor could stand up a sustainable energy utility to accelerate solar development. All customers are still served by DTE as well. And so Ann Arbor still has to take additional steps to achieve 100% renewable electricity. And then finally, Ann Arbor could take possession of DTE's electrical distribution within the city and become the load serving entity for all customers within the city except the University of Michigan. Part of the reason for that distinction is that the university owns the distribution system within the campus. So there's no reason Ann Arbor should take that over. And then the university, at least most buildings at the university, connect to substations where they would get power from the transmission network. They could continue to take service from DTE or on their own, but it's not load that needs to be accounted for in an Ann Arbor municipal electric utility, nor is the takeover of the University of Michigan distribution system a cost that needs to be accounted for. So that's the way we approach that. So we're going to talk about each of these options a little bit, beginning on the next slide. So the sustainable energy utility, basic question was, is there a way to operate a sustainable energy utility that allows people within the city to obtain solar with basically no money down, not having to make that investment themselves, and therefore accelerate adoption? For it to do that, the SEU needs to be cost competitive with private solar leases. There are solar installers out there who will basically lease you a rooftop solar system. And it is necessary to get uptake, that the SEU be at least competitive with that option. And our short answer is it can be. It's not trivial to do, but it can be done. And this table shows some of the options, but there are large numbers of different ways of approaching this, but we wanted to illustrate some aspects of it here. So the first two columns with numbers are different time periods and numbers of subscribers. So the first leftmost column is for the period 24 to 27, or deployment during those years. The second is for 2027 to 2030. And both of those are assuming debt financing of the investment necessary to supply those solar systems. That debt could be municipal general obligation debt, or it could be revenue bonds. And it would get, city interest rates, basically, which are lower than is typical. But the burden of that debt can be a problem, and there are legal limits to how much debt the city can take on. So we also evaluated an option where the SEU essentially contracts with a third-party owner who supplies the funding and then passes through the recovery of that cost to the city, which bundles it together with other costs to determine rates to subscribers. And that gets to potentially to a bigger scale, but the cost of financing is a bit higher. So there are lots of other options. As I say, this is simply to illustrate some of the considerations. The last point on this slide really is if you look down toward the bottom 3 rows, there's a PV only starting power purchase agreement rate. So this is what somebody with SEU solar on their rooftop would pay per kilowatt hour of output from that rooftop solar. The second one is PV plus storage, where the storage is paid for as a part of the kilowatt hour rate. And then finally, you could stick with the power purchase agreement rate per kilowatt hour for the solar and add storage with just a fixed monthly payment for the storage capacity. And that is what is shown in the bottom row. So for PV only, you can get about 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour in the early days. There's a combination of escalating rates and with inflation, and then additional systems being built at future costs, which will be lower, but still come into the mix. So we're forecasting that you'd be about a 13.5 cent per kilowatt hour rate in the late 20s. If you instead use third-party financing, you could get a rate. Again, there are other factors here different than just the financing difference, but a similar kind of rate of, around 12 or 13 cents a kilowatt hour. That's competitive with solar leases. DTE's rates for power are 17 or 18 cents a kilowatt hour, and as everyone knows, going up. So it's a practical, reasonable offer that you might expect people to accept. If you bundle storage in, you get a pretty hefty kilowatt hour rate. And it doesn't really provide that much opportunity for arbitrage between, day and night, so as to use your solar at night when otherwise you'd have to buy grid power. You can do that to a degree, but financially it doesn't gain you much. So mostly the value of storage is the resilience value, and the typical market construct today, where third-party developers offer solar plus storage, is to charge a fixed amount per month for the storage and not bundle that into the kilowatt hour rate. So these are things that will have to be thought through in setting up an SEU, but gives you a flavor of the opportunities and the decisions that have to be made. Next slide. I'm going to now go to the municipalization option. And this requires a lot of caveats and thinking through carefully. So bear with me for a moment. First off, we're showing they're currently labeled as low and high end estimates. These are not necessarily the absolute lowest or highest that could occur. So they're lower and higher scenarios, if you will. And I'm going to talk more about the basis for those in a minute, but first some other considerations. These numbers are based on essentially all of this happening overnight. So it's 2024 numbers. The reality is that, it will take several years if the city pursues this and is successful before you would be able to stand up a municipal utility. In the interim, there will, of course, be inflation In addition to that, some of the equipment that is in the current distribution system will be retired and replaced. DTE may do some things to improve the distribution system. So the mix of assets in, say, 2032 or something will simply be different than it is today. And that would lead to a different set of numbers. So these are not the numbers that you can rely on for something that far in the future. They're to give you a sense of what the numbers might be. In addition to that point, I want to stress that this analysis is based on Ann Arbor taking over DTE's distribution system assets within the city, investing a fair amount in constructing new substations and primary distribution lines in some areas, because Ann Arbor cannot take over service to communities outside of the city in this way. And a lot of the substations that serve Ann Arbor also serve other communities. Some of those are inclusions within Ann Arbor. A lot of them are in the border area, but it's cheaper and better in many ways, likely anyway, to construct new substations and separate from DTE than to try to procure use of substations as a service from DTE. So that was our approach in coming up with these estimates. Another key point is these are costs for Ann Arbor to take over the distribution system and then replace things on their normal aging schedule and maintain and operate the distribution system. But they do not include any investment in radically improving reliability. Being able to do that in a sound way requires a level of information about the distribution system that's hard to do without DTE's records, which we're not able to obtain as a part of this effort. So this is not the cost that would be expected for the desired significantly improved distribution system. This is the cost to take over and continue to operate what DTE has or has in the future when this happens. And then reliability improvements or resilience improvements would have to be on top of this. So that's really important to understand. The main variation between the low end and high end estimates is what theory we apply, what legal theory we apply as to what Ann Arbor would have to pay DTE to take these assets. Michigan is unique in having a perpetual franchise. DTE is entitled to continue to serve the customers it serves indefinitely. In many parts of the country where municipalization has been done, they have city franchises for service in the area for a finite duration, and then they can take up municipalization as an option at the time of franchise renewal. So that doesn't happen here. So there's a lot of uncertainty about the legal theory that applies to how much DTE is entitled to if Ann Arbor takes over the distribution system and begins serving DTE's current customers in the city. Our low end estimate here is based on the idea that you would basically condemn the distribution assets, and it's a 1.5 times multiple, but of the original cost of those assets less accumulated depreciation. So if $1 million was paid 10 years ago and the thing was expected to last 20 years, you'd basically have $500,000 that need to be paid for that times 1.5. And that 1.5 is just something that has emerged from practice elsewhere, what kinds of numbers courts typically decide. Courts or regulators, depending on the jurisdiction. In addition, by taking over the distribution system and serving those customers, Ann Arbor would then incur the obligation to serve the power needs of those customers. DTE has some assets that they currently use to provide that power. And there's the possibility that those assets become what is referred to as stranded costs, costs that they incurred, investments that they made based on the assumption they would be serving Ann Arbor, and they would no longer be serving Ann Arbor. However, they would be able to sell that power in the wholesale market, and the capacity credits associated with those facilities can be sold. And so the stranded cost valuation is really the difference between what DTE's expectations are and in the way of revenue under the current regulatory scheme versus what the revenue might be from those assets in the event that they lost the ability to serve Ann Arbor. On the high end, we're assuming that DTE is found by the jurisdiction, which is probably Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to have a reasonable expectation of basically all the revenue they are getting. There are some operation and maintenance costs that would be deducted, but there would be a large amount that would need to be paid to DTE. So in between, there are multiple other legal theories. So the key thing to take away from this is that the uncertainties are about the legal theories or standards that would apply for compensating DTE. Those would be litigated. There are few precedents and competing theories. And so there's really no way to significantly resolve these uncertainties short of trying the legal process. And again, this does not include improving reliability. This is just taking it over. If we can go forward, that was year one. Here's year 20 when the city has amortized debt taken on to obtain DTE's assets. And here it looks a bit more favorable. But again, this is without reliability improvements. So we're saying that there's the possibility on the low end that the rates are lower, on the high end higher. But a great deal of uncertainty in both of these numbers. Next slide is just to put this in a bit of context for you. The horizontal here is the all-in rate for the municipal utility based, and then the vertical is the valuation of DTE's assets. The vertical line shows the rate that DTE currently charges. And remember, all of this was done as though it's happening in 2024. The blue line on the angle shows the relationship between the all-in rate and the asset valuation. So you can see that the range of conditions under which rates go down or are, below the DTE rate is fairly limited. And so the legal risks are such that you're probably looking at higher rates. But that's all to be determined if you go down this path. Next slide. So we looked at the structural options against the Ann Arbor criteria and principles in much the same way as I described for the energy options. And again, you can reduce greenhouse gases and get additionality of renewables under any of these structures. By way of explanation on equity and justice, there are basically two considerations. One is that it's likely that costs are higher, at least in early years under an MEU, than continuing to take service from DTE. And with higher costs, equity considerations become challenging. The other thing is that under Michigan law right now, DTE, consumers and other investor-owned utilities are allowed to have, in fact, they're required to have low-income rates where some of the costs that would otherwise be paid by low-income households are shifted to other customers. There's no such provision allowing a municipal utility to do that in current law. And so Ann Arbor would not be able to say, well, we're going to give low rates to low-income households and the rest of us pick up the tab. So for that reason, we identified that there's an equity and justice problem with the municipal utility. There are other considerations like reliability, and there is the possibility that the MEU could address some inequalities of reliability by where investments are made. But that, of course, is at a cost that's not accounted for in our analysis. Excuse me. Because the MEU will take a while to accomplish, if you decide to go down that road, it does poorly on speed. And then, doing something supplemental to DTE can be done about as fast as anything can be done. So speed plays into this. Starting local, really the SEU is your principal option structurally to address that and sustainability by having generation within the community. Next slide. So our recommendations generally are, first, to get to 100% renewable electricity, you're going to have to top off whatever you currently have at any time with renewable energy credits. And to maintain flexibility and keep costs low, you should do that with national renewable energy credits. But that is a topping off. Underneath that, you want to build up a portfolio of higher quality renewable energy credits. You can do that by pursuing the SEU to accelerate solar development and resilience within the city. And we recommend that you do that. And then you can pursue higher quality renewable energy credits by acquiring virtual power purchase agreements for credits that come from a known source. You require geography, other considerations, and displace those national renewable energy credits that would otherwise be in your portfolio. And those can address your other values. The virtual PPAs, your procurement of those could be structured so that DTE's voluntary green pricing programs count, and DTE could be the supplier of those. And then finally, because of the impossibility, in our view, or the extreme unlikelihood of achieving municipalization fast enough to then have it as the basis of 100% renewable electricity by 2030, we think you need to sort of decouple those considerations. You need to go after 100% renewables by other means. And if you, at the same time, want to pursue municipalization, you can, and just structure what you do in the meantime so that it can be conveyed over to the municipal utility when the time comes. But we don't see any workable path where you achieve municipalization fast and have the municipal utility meet your 100% renewable electricity commitment by 2030. Next slide.
Hey, Douglas, it's Rick. We ought to leave a couple of minutes for questions because there are a few. I wonder if we can just leave this up on screen.
Absolutely.
And, Missy, would you like to moderate the questions?
Yeah, happy to. Well, thank you, Douglas, Rick, and team. I know this was a lot of information, but I think that's the reality. This is a lot of information and variables that we're going to have to consider. There are a few questions that have come in throughout. I've been trying to answer them, but there are a few I've kind of held because I think they're more for you, Douglas.
Okay.
Let's see. Broadly, if the city did a power purchase agreement and we as a city were still with DT, how would the power from that purchase agreement show up on our bills?
It wouldn't show up on your DTE bills. It would show up on the city's budget. So the power purchase agreement could be structured so that the city is buying the power and selling it into the wholesale market and covering the difference. But as I said, that can be quite risky and we recommend not doing that. So more likely you would have a power purchase agreement where you just agree that you'll pay, pick a number, let's say $10 a megawatt hour to somebody for them producing renewable energy and selling it into the wholesale market. So that would come out of the city budget.
Thanks, Douglas. So we have two questions on RECs. Did the evaluation of the national REC option include consideration for hourly matching and the associated cost of hourly matching and still find it viable?
It did not consider hourly matching. The national REC market really doesn't offer that as a product, hourly RECs. There are firms, experimenting with it, notably including Google, but they are doing it by contracts with specific sources, not in the national REC market.
Great. And then, as you know, not all RECs are high quality. If we top off with RECs, how do we know we're getting real value? Any tips or tricks there?
Well, you can make some choices on the RECs in the national market, basically vintage of the facility. So you could say we want it to be additional, so we only want new facilities. And to some extent, you can specify geography, but there's not much more that you can do with that. So what you really are doing is financially contributing to what you think is a higher production of renewables in the country or the world than otherwise would occur, and taking credit for that. But there's not much more than just vintage and geography that you can do in the voluntary national renewable energy credit market. You can also do technology. I should add that. You can do solar and wind and biomass.
Thank you so much. Folks, please type your questions into the Q&A. We are getting at time, but we'll make it through what's in just a minute. I'll kind of close it up. But we have right now 5 coming in. If the MEU scenario, in the MEU scenario, is the renewable energy also being provided in part by RECs? Or this wasn't really looked at since an MEU is not viable by 2030?
Well, I can answer nonetheless. Any utility that needs power from the transmission system is just getting the electrons are not colored. They're generic. You're getting power flows that are based on physics, not on what you've contracted for. So in some broad sense, when you say as a utility that you're getting your power from wind and solar, that just means that you are arranging that wind and solar are put onto the grid in amounts equal to what you're taking off of the grid. And there's not a flow of power from those facilities to you. So renewable energy credits are a way of keeping count of whether you're supplying as much renewable power as you're consuming. And that is a little bit different, but you know, it's not quite the same as separating those RECs and selling them separately from the power. And then many utilities do buy or sell RECs in addition to their investments in or power purchase agreements from those specific facilities, just to balance the books on their obligations.
Thanks, Douglas. A question that may be more theoretical, but how do we get specific information about DTE's distribution infrastructure?
Some additional work could be done by having an engineering team spend a great deal more time going around and looking at it. But ultimately, you would need records. Not everything you need to know is visible. And you probably don't get those records short of beginning a legal process and then using discovery to get that information.
Thank you. Why 20-year projections? Why not 30-year projections for costs?
Well, for things that would last more than 30 years, we have not attributed all of the costs to the 20 years. The costs are annualized over the expected life of the asset. So there's not an overcharge, if you will. 20 years is already pretty speculative as to what the electricity requirements will be, what the costs of things will be. So we just didn't think it would contribute much to anybody's understanding to project things beyond 20 years. But
Douglas, can I just make sure I also understood that?
Yeah,
I
sure.
heard you say if an asset is good for 30 years, you didn't push it into a 20-year time frame. You would have had it cost out over a 30-year, but on the 20-year time frame, you only had the amount of the cost over the 20 years. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Last question I see. Great job. Was the SEU storage rate per month, the $82, for some estimated amount of total storage or per kilowatt? Joe, that might be for you.
Yeah, Joe, take it.
Sure, finding to unmute here. The value is based on a typical residential home system. So think of like a Tesla Powerwall in that case, and then not just the costs associated with the direct overnight capital costs of the equipment, but also including financing costs and operational costs over the lifetime of the asset.
Thanks, Joe. Great. Well, we are slightly over time, so I just want to thank everyone for participating. I'd like to do a special thanks to the folks we have on the line from Five Lakes, from Sunstore, and from New Gen Strategies and Solutions. You did a lot of work. Very, very clearly, a lot of thought went into this analysis, and we really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with you to move this forward. There's a lot of conversations that are going to be happening in the community in the coming months, and we appreciate the ability to have the data to help inform those conversations. So everybody, once again, we're going to end this webinar. If you have questions, feel free to share them with us directly. We will once again be presenting at the Energy Commission next week. So if you have a chance to reflect and have other things that you want to bring forward, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I just want to thank you again for coming tonight. Please stay engaged, learn more about our work to become carbon neutral in a just and equitable way, A20, by checking out the city's website, www.a2gov.org/sustainability. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night and be safe.
Goodbye. Thank you.